Video game bosses are a cheeky bunch, aren't they? I mean, sure, nowadays we have cutscenes and flavor text to tell you who you're up against, but back in the old days, they'd sometimes just pop up out of nowhere and give you quite the surprise. And that's to say nothing of games that went, psych, here's the real final boss. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 surprise final video game bosses that came out of nowhere. Number 10, Kalasmos, Dragon Quest XI. Now this one sits at the bottom of this list due to Kalasmos technically showing up before the final battle, but in a side quest that almost everyone misses due to the fact that the game never tells you, oh, by the way, important plot stuff is happening here and maybe you should go and stop by. Of course, due to Dragon Quest's nature of being a celebration of tried and true JRPG tropes, it shouldn't be that surprising that you get to kick God himself in the teeth at the end. Kalasmos is an eldritch god of emptiness, born at the dawn of time, who seeks to return everything to the nothingness that encompasses his being. Now, originally the other big bad stopped Kalasmos from returning after he took over the world, since it is kind of hard to rule this world when there is no world. But then you go back in time and erase the entire second act of the game from ever happening, meaning that Kalasmos is reborn unhindered. Oops. And so the game's true final boss is this giant cell-like looking creature from Dragon Ball Z, who the hero has somehow less connection to than he did with the other big bad, making the whole thing feel utterly transparent. Number 9, Coolex, Super Mario RPG. Seeing as how this is one of the original WTF out-of-nowhere boss fights, I couldn't really bring myself to leave Coolex off this list. Now, at this time, Square had a reputation for super tough boss battles that required fulfilling certain requirements to unlock, but this was one of their first instances of becoming the stuff of pre-internet gamer legend. Coolex is a monster from the Final Fantasy series who makes an appearance in Super Mario RPG as a secret boss. And like other Square Enix secret bosses, Coolex will absolutely wreck your shit if you aren't prepared. Coolex, of course, is the strongest boss in the game and hits like an absolute truck, as well as testing your reflexes with time button presses. Now, it's not the hardest boss in the Mario RPG sub-genre, but it was the first and arguably the most memorable of them all. Number 8, Donkey Kong, Punch-Out for the Wii. Now, no one really knew what to expect from this long-awaited sequel to Nintendo's classic Punch-Out franchise when it first hit the shelves, but whatever was expected, Donkey Kong being the true final boss of the game likely wasn't on that list. Punch-Out Wii's roster is exactly what you'd expect up until that moment, with the kinds of weirdos and national caricatures that's always given this otherwise typical boxing game franchise its identity. But if you fulfill certain requirements before the final boss, you can fight the ultimate challenge this game has to offer: Donkey Kong sporting a pair of bright red boxing gloves. Now, you'd think this fight would be over fairly quickly, right? Since gorillas are typically quite a bit stronger than your average sad, squishy human, and sure enough, this fight can be over for you fast if you're not prepared. As Donkey Kong hits hard, he hits fast, and has very subtle tells of which ways he's going to attack, often leaving you with mere seconds to get Little Mac out of the way. Number 7, Emerald and Ruby Weapons, Final Fantasy VII. Now, I know that you'll be looking at this and saying, Jules, these are optional secret bosses, these don't actually count as the final boss. Everyone knows that Sephiroth is that final boss. And yes, you are totally correct, my friend. But these bosses here, these optional super bosses, if you will, they appear at the end of the game and can indeed be the final boss that you end up beating because, well, compared to Sephiroth, they're the real challenge on show here. Taking out just one of these monstrosities is a Herculean task, but even then Hercules would throw in the towel when facing down the prospect of fighting both of them. Number 6, Chakravartin, Asuras Wrath. Who doesn't love a boss battle that you actually have to pay for and the game tells you it's actually the real, 100% true, for real guys, actual ending? Cool. Because throughout Asuras Wrath, you're led to believe that the kidnapper of daughters and world conqueror known as Vlitra is the real final boss. But no, it turns out that you're going to be fighting a creator deity known as Chakravartin, who is this weird-ass spider creature that had been helping you out this entire time as the final boss. And naturally, because he is the final boss, he wants to destroy the world and try again, with Asura naturally taking exception to this plan. While Chakravartin's spider form was a mainstay of the game, there's no reference to him being a creator deity anywhere else in the game, so it is a bit odd that he pops up to absolutely wreck shop come the close of this DLC. Maybe Capcom didn't want to clue you in on the fact that he was the final true boss of the game, because this might have tipped players off early that they'd have to spend more money in order to finish the story, and we rightly would have had a problem with this. Number 5, Yalda Bayoth, Persona 5. Being one of the founders of modern JRPGs, it was inevitable that one of the true bosses from the Persona games would end up here. But Yaldabaoth lacks something that the previous two secret bosses, Nyx and Izanami, had that keeps them off this list, and that was actual bloody build-up. You see, both of the previous bosses were at least somehow established before they were officially revealed as the final bosses. But Yaldabaoth, on the other hand, well, he's got none of this. You're told that there is something at the bottom of this seemingly endless maze of mementos, but you're given no clues as to what it might be. And this boss, like various personas throughout the game, is actually based on a real-world mythology and religion, referenced as an angel in the Gospel of Judas, destined to come down to Earth to rule over chaos and the underworld. Nowhere else in the game is Christian text, let alone specifically Christian text like the Gospel of Judas, ever referenced at all. And I mean, that does tend to be a cultural blind spot when you set your game in a country with an at most 2% Christian population, but still, pretty fun boss fight. Number 4, Red, Pokemon Gold and Silver. Sometimes the whole appeal of a true final boss is how they come completely out of left field. Case in point, the famous final boss of Pokemon Gold and Silver. Frankly, the whole second half of the game comes out of nowhere in the best way possible. After completing the Johto Pokemon League, you're given a chance to hop on a boat back to Kanto to become a 2-time champion of the previous game's world. But just when you think that's the end of it, you hear that there's the ultimate challenger waiting for you on top of a mountain. And when you get there, who should be waiting but Red, the protagonist of the original game. This battle is hard, one of the hardest in the entire franchise to this day. Red makes you earn your victory and subsequent playground bragging rights right here, throwing some of the strongest non-legendary Pokemon in the game at you. So yeah, this is one of the few times that having a final boss with zero build-up actually paid off spectacularly. Number 3, Fantoon, Metroid Other M. Now, I don't blame you for not knowing about this boss if you played Metroid Other M when it first came out. Seeing as how this game is the kind of hot stinking garbage that one usually finds rotting behind a long-abandoned factory that is also on fire, I can't imagine anyone but the most die-hard completionists even bothering to see what was beyond the end credits of this infamous game. But sure enough, if you do manage to get through the main story, you catch up with Samus returning to the bottle ship to settle some unfinished business. But once she gets to the ship's bridge, a classic foe returns in the form of Fantoon, who has now taken the form of a giant eldritch squid abomination thing that immediately attacks Samus, tearing the ship apart in the process. This is a classic secret boss, one that has zero bearing on the plot and is just there to give the player one last challenge, as well as give fans a much needed wink and nod. But again, tire fire of a game. Number 2, The Lingering Will, Kingdom Hearts 2. One of the most recognizable secret bosses in gaming history comes at the very end of Kingdom Hearts 2 after jumping through a frankly ridiculous number of hoops whilst finishing the game on the hardest difficulty. Kingdom Hearts is infamous for being insanely cryptic as it builds mysteries within mysteries that seemingly have no end, because that's what Tetsuya Nomura seems hell-bent on ensuring that his fans will go to the grave with nothing but unanswered questions on their lips. The Lingering Will, in that respect, is an anomaly, since all of the questions he raised when he first appeared actually kind of have definitive answers. This is the remaining will of the Keyblade Master Terra, toiling in regret over not being able to save his comrades during a climactic last battle. When Sora, Donald, and Goofy find the will through a door that appears in Disney Castle, he decides to test Sora to see if he's ready for the battle ahead of him. And oh god, does he ever test him, as this guy makes most Dark Souls bosses look like not yet potty-trained labradoodles, but that just makes defeating him all the more satisfying. And number 1, Osma, Final Fantasy IX. So here at the bottom of the list, we end on the enigmatic Osma from Final Fantasy IX. Now this game never really makes clear what the hell this thing is, probably because its history isn't actually really relevant. What is relevant though is that this thing hurts. To this day, Osma remains one of, if not the toughest secret bosses in a franchise that's made super tough secret bosses a grand tradition. Its defense is insane, its health is the highest in the entire game, and it hits so hard that you'll be begging for Necron by the end of things. Now technically Necron is actually a more out-of-nowhere boss, since he literally appears with zero fanfare at the end of the game. However, Osma is worse because to get to it you have to go through the Chocobo Garden subplot, which may as well be its own separate game, and the game never really tells you what's awaiting you at the top of the last garden. Osma has zero build-up. We know literally nothing about it or why it wants to kick our asses. All you know is that fighting this thing is the ultimate final challenge of Final Fantasy IX, and for many players, that's all they needed to know. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 final video game bosses that came out out of nowhere. I hope you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ0, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice. That's Dice with a C, where I do all of my streaming outside of work, and it'd be great to see you over there, my friends. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. In life, sometimes negativity and bad times will come out of nowhere, and we won't be ready for it. But what I want you to remember right here, right now, is that you are not alone. Friends, family, professionals in the support industry, they care about you and want you to do well, okay? So even when you're hit with bad times and rough luck, just remember there are people out there that have your back, and go out there and absolutely smash it. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.